Historically, encryption was widely used only by the military. But with the advent of the internet, almost everybody needs it. Encryption is a way to ensure privacy by changing your online messages into sort of a secret code. Most web browsers automatically encrypt text when connecting to a secure server. That is, a web address beginning with HTTPS. The messages or files are scrambled as they travel in between computers, but then the message is decrypted when it arrives at its destination. So if you bought something online, the sensitive information like your address, credit card, or phone number is usually encrypted. But not all the information exchanged online is encrypted, and not all encryption methods are created equal. Like 64-bit encryption used to be all the rage, but nowadays 120-bit is the standard. And even that will surely change and get better as time goes on. And it should. Unencrypted internet exchanges are not only accessible by virtually anyone, but they can be available for years, and possibly on servers that could change ownership or become compromised eventually. So it might sound mysterious, but encryption is your friend. I'm Holly for Tech News Daily.
Here's the question, what is encryption? Simply put, encryption keeps your information and communication private on the web. It works like this. You fire up your computer and head over to Amazon to buy anything, really. And at some point, you have to pull out a credit card to pay for what's in your cart. Amazon and other stores on the web will scramble your payment information so it essentially looks like gibberish before it's sent to online sellers' accounts. When it arrives, the info is then unscrambled and the money can pass through without anyone stealing your credit card info. The encrypted part of this transaction was in between you, the buyer, and the seller. Encryption also helps secure your email, home banking, and even your Facebook and WhatsApp sessions. But the practice has come under fire lately, as it's been linked to terrorism. The US government has tried and is still trying to force tech companies to create backdoors for the encrypted communication we all use. The problem is, encryption only works as intended if third parties don't have a key. And privacy experts say if a backdoor is created, even with the best of intentions, it's only a matter of time before people and even other governments you really don't want to have the keys find them. If you have a question to Ask Newsy, leave it in a comment on social media, tweet at us with the hashtag AskNewsy, or just send us an email. For Newsy, I'm Leah Becerra.
If somebody were monitoring your daily internet traffic, they could potentially see every website you open and read any messages you're sending. But encryption turns your comprehensible stream of information into something that looks like a river of gibberish. Early encryption wasn't as powerful, but the technique was relatively simple. In Roman times, secret messages were written on a piece of fabric wrapped around a stick. To decode the message, the receiver had to wrap the fabric around the same size stick. If you intercepted it and didn't know about the stick, you'd be stuck. A very common type of code is the transposition cipher. This simple code offsets each letter in the alphabet from its original character by an agreed-upon number. So, if the code was 3 and the message was hello, the letters would shift over 3 spaces in the alphabet, and the encrypted version would read as core. But today's encryption is harder to crack because the keys are more complicated than a simple stick or a number. Today's keys use advanced mathematical algorithms, like the factors of 2 prime numbers, or a complex cipher that turns 1 bit of data into 64 bits of noise. Encryption isn't foolproof, but the hardest codes can take so long to break, they aren't really worth trying. Sometimes that's enough to protect your info, but the only way to be absolutely certain that your data is 100% secure is to keep it to yourself.
I'm here on 14th Street in New York City where hundreds of people are messaging friends and family with their phones. But while they're texting, the FBI, advocacy groups, and government agencies are all battling over who can read those text messages. Most messages, like those sent from WhatsApp, which was the most popular messaging app in 2019, or Apple's iMessage, are encrypted. That means that they are kept private from everyone except the intended recipient. And while these platforms aren't perfect, Jeff Bezos' phone was recently accessed through a malicious video message via WhatsApp. Many people rely on the privacy that encryption provides daily.
Encryption is basically how you lock your door online.
Some law enforcement agencies and dignitaries like Attorney General William Barr would argue that the protection provided by encryption also protects criminals and terrorists.
There are situations where we would want the government, for example, to be able to get access to certain information.
The president believes tech companies like Apple should be building encryption with so-called backdoors.
I don't care. We have to find out what's going on.
The benefits of encryption as a tool are practically countless, and few would argue that on either side. The issue is who should be able to use that encryption and for what.
On the one hand, you have law enforcement and government agencies who are arguing that they need access to information in order to be able to prosecute criminals, versus those that are arguing that we need encryption to protect the functioning of our democracy.
And many human rights activists, privacy experts, and members of the tech community believe it is essential to online and physical safety.
If we don't have encryption, if we don't have that level of anonymity, then we simply can't exist online. And sometimes that might mean not exist in life.
End-to-end encryption saves lives. It saves lives.
You might be surprised how many services use encryption to keep data private. Banks use encryption for mobile payments and deposits. iMessage and Signal use end-to-end encryption to secure message data, and encryption is also used to protect sensitive data like health data.
Your web browser has strong encryption in it. Like whenever you buy something online, there's really strong encryption happening in the background of it to protect your credit card and your transaction.
To put it very simply, when information is sent from user A to user B, the information is converted into a jumble of nonsense. That nonsense is encrypted and decrypted according to a key. User B uses that key to decrypt the information, and this is all done digitally.
Encryption is the science of secret codes, but it is essentially just math. It's applied math. It's not fancy in terms of technological things. It's fancy math.
It's important to stress that encryption is a tool. It scrambles data to an unrecognizable state, even for the government. The argument for most is what data should be scrambled. Bank data, government communications, these things are often regarded as data that should be scrambled and therefore secured.
Do we really need there to be lawful access into the command and control channels that are used for operational technology, say to run a dam or an electric power plant? There's no reason you would ever need, quote unquote, lawful access to that system.
Personal communications like messages sent with WhatsApp are some of that scrambled data that's facing scrutiny.
On the other hand, there are other channels that you can imagine where there might be a more valid trade-off between what the protection that encryption provides and the needs of law enforcement to do investigations.
But who is to say who can scramble what data?
I don't think it's appropriate for the government to decide that they get security and we don't. And curious, if law enforcement actually went around your neighborhood and said, look, there's burglars on the loose, so we want you to leave your front door open. So in case you're a burglar, we can come find you without having to break down your door. Most people would say, that's crazy. Go back and learn your job. You're supposed to be protecting me.
And the line between digital and physical safety can be a thin one. For example, the EFF has worked with victims of domestic violence to help them stay safe and secure.
Being able to have communications over WhatsApp, whether you're trying to find your way to a shelter find a shelter, arrange for whatever's going to happen when somebody's going to come get you or you're going to get yourself out, making sure that you can cover your tracks about who helped you, where you went, and where you got help can be the difference between life or death for people who are escaping domestic violence situations.
Encryption is also protecting human rights activists and folks who are living in countries with dictators and persecutory policies. Esra built a social platform called Ahwa where individuals who identify as LGBTQ+ can virtually meet and talk with each other in Middle Eastern and North African countries, such as Egypt, where homosexuality is not expressly illegal, but where the government has used laws against what they call debauchery, among others, to criminalize LGBTQ+ individuals.
Encryption is very important for us. I mean, we are operating in such a sensitive part of the world where censorship and surveillance are the norm, where individuals are tracked not just because of what they believe, but simply because of who they are. Their very identity, their very existence is in fact a crime.
Because Ahwa is public, yet anonymized and encrypted, people are able to share experiences, share resources, and share life-saving advice.
If somebody, for example, says, I'm a lesbian in Saudi Arabia, I have suicidal thoughts because I can't reconcile my identity with my faith, and then people can come who can relate to that topic without needing to sign in and see what other people are writing in terms of support, in terms of resources, where can I go to get any types of counseling, mental health. If you're a trans individuals, where can I go to get some hormonal therapy without risking my life? This is what Ahwa really stands for, is accessibility with the responsibility for security.
On the other side of the issue, some argue that encryption actually masks threats to national security and the security of civilians.
Not all access all of the time is bad, and maybe we want to take some of the risks that are associated with having lawful access, understanding that they pose risks, and we still want to do that anyway.
On December 2nd, 2015, Saeed Farouk and Tashfeen Malik opened fire in the city of San Bernardino, California, leaving 14 people and the two shooters dead. During the investigation, the FBI attained Farouk's iPhone, but could not access it through the passcode. They went to Apple to unlock it, and Apple couldn't help.
I think it's frankly disgraceful. I think it's a disgrace what they're doing. And I think that ultimately Apple will have the blood of dead Americans on their hands for these kinds of decisions.
Apple's encryption was so good, according to Apple, that Apple itself couldn't access the encrypted data on the phone. Beyond that, the assistance ordered by a federal judge would overhaul the system that disables the phone after 10 unsuccessful password attempts. Tim Cook called the order chilling.
We did not expect to be in this position at odds with our own government. But we believe strongly that we have a responsibility to help you protect your data and protect your privacy.
We have a tremendous problem with data breaches and lack of security in the digital world, and encryption is one of the very few tools we have that can help protect us, and so it's tremendously important that we stand up for it.
Putting what was being called a backdoor in the iOS framework would allow the FBI to access the contents of iPhones everywhere, as is legally its right with a warrant, but would also leave the operating system much more vulnerable to hackers and other governments.
It does come across often as the government side sort of more or less demanding a unicorn, right? We just want the tech sector to provide access to their products, but only for us, and only under the conditions that we say. And of course, the tech sector says, well, that's not possible, because math.
The FBI took Apple to court about the issue, but found another way into the iPhone without Apple's help.
We're being asked to create a method to hack our own phones.
The case was dropped, but the debate still continues.
Encryption is good. The right way is to leave Apple alone. The government's being lazy. Investigation's too hard. That's what I say. So we're just going to sacrifice your civil liberties.
The price we pay for this privacy is that privacy covers criminals and the crimes they commit. Drugs and gun sales, human trafficking, these are all done in the very dark, secret, and private corners of the internet.
Where are we willing to risk not getting information for investigations? Where are we willing to risk potentially having the bad guys gain access to a channel because of, weakened encryption?
all of our rights have trade-offs. And we as a society have to decide if we want to make that trade-off. But I think we should recognize the downsides to the rest of us of taking away our security, and balance that against making it maybe slightly harder in maybe a few cases for the FBI to catch somebody who's done something wrong.
Facebook is now in the political spotlight, having declared its dedication to end-to-end encryption for messaging apps WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. In an open letter to Facebook, U.S. Attorney General William Barr, along with dignitaries from the UK and Australia, warned that, quote, security enhancements to the virtual world should not make us more vulnerable in the physical world, and that, quote, children's safety and law enforcement's ability to bring criminals to justice must not be the ultimate cost of Facebook taking forward these proposals. He wants government bodies to have legal access to data that could be involved in a crime.
Important people get security, but little ordinary people don't get security.
These are challenges that people like him can't even fathom, because they've never been in a situation where your very identity is criminalized.
Over 100 organizations signed a letter urging Facebook to continue its pursuit of end-to-end encryption against the wishes spelled out in the letter from the US, UK, and Australian governments. These organizations included the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, and the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
We felt it was important for Facebook to stand its ground and to understand that, that people like us who work on behalf of users, if Facebook stands with their users on this, we'll stand with them.
The leaders of WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger responded to the Attorney General William Barr in another open letter, saying, quote, the backdoor access you are demanding for law enforcement would be a gift to criminals, hackers, and repressive regimes, creating a way for them to enter our systems and leaving every person on our platform more vulnerable to real-life harm.
I believe Facebook is absolutely correct to resist this. I do not think we want to be creating vulnerabilities because they're going to get exploited.
I've heard from people, friends and family, who say, why should I be worried that the government has my data? I'm not doing anything wrong. Or jokes that the government would be bored with my data. But Esra says that she might have to shut down Ahua if encryption were forcibly weakened.
I think the risk would multiply so much that we would just completely feel paralyzed, that we will no longer be able to grow, maintain, and sustain all of these initiatives. And the internet as a whole will lose so many voices, so many communities, so many narratives, so many perspectives that we really need in order to grow and expand and decentralize, genuinely decentralize the internet, so that it is more representative of marginalized voices that have been silenced for too long.
There's also the concern that taking encryption away from some people won't stop the criminals who will find other ways to communicate privately.
If we set up lawful access to certain channels, many of the adversaries will simply move to channels where that law enforcement access does not exist.
When you think about the real bad guys of the world, if we're talking about ISIS or terrorist groups, they're going to have access to strong encryption.
And an American policy calling for backdoors in encryption would create an international precedence.
If Apple creates this backdoor, then China's going to say, oh, well, that's nice. Iran's going to say, that's a beautiful backdoor.
Exactly.
Turkey,
hand it over.
Same thing, right?
From 2014, when Apple started encrypting users' iPhone content, to 2016, Manhattan's then district attorney said he was in possession of 175 iPhones that could have provided evidence in legal cases. Encryption has the potential, as we've seen, to thwart the efforts of law enforcement to catch criminals and prevent crimes.
The Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, the Fourth Amendment right to be free of search and seizures, these are all rights that give us protection against law enforcement that has downsides. That means that sometimes bad guys might go free. But we know that in order to keep the rest of us free, we need to have this balance in the role of law enforcement.
Amnesty International says there is no middle ground. If law enforcement is allowed to circumvent encryption, then anybody can. They feel that either everyone is protected, from community activists to terrorists, from regular people to governments, or no one is protected.
This is an incredibly complex area that we will have to grapple with as a society, and I would much rather us grapple with it proactively and arrive at some policy decisions than make, bad decisions in the wake of a disaster one way or the other.
A lot of people sometimes think, oh no, this issue is exaggerated. And the bigger concern is what if militants are using encryption? That's why we should ban it, because in order to protect millions of people, we need to risk the lives of 100,000 people. That's not true. I think that argument is incredibly weak. I think there's a lot that we can do to balance the two.
You may not know it, but you rely on encryption every day already. And this isn't the government trying to prevent you from getting something. This is the government trying to take away something you already have.
Facebook is announcing what some are calling a major shift. CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced in a blog post that the company plans to move towards encrypted and quickly disappearing forms of communication. He wrote, and I'm quoting here, "As I think about the future of the internet, I believe a privacy-focused communications platform will become even more important than today's open platforms." I'm going to bring in CNET senior producer Dan Patterson. Dan, what more do we know about this?
So Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, and Instagram are three individual products that Facebook owns. They all have messaging capabilities, but they all have legacy individualized messaging capabilities, meaning Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, and Instagram are unable to communicate on the back end, the databases, with each other. Facebook is streamlining this to make things more efficient and to provide one unified system.
Mm-hmm. We know that Zuckerberg is doing this for privacy issues to sort of combat that issue. But this isn't entirely altruistic, right? He's going to be making money off of this.
Yeah, so they say this is about privacy, but it's also about monetization. There are a number of ways they can make money on this. One is simply by making things a little more efficient, but the other is through cryptocurrency and through payments, transferring of money. So if you think about the way companies like Venmo and others monetize, cash is monetized on the float, meaning interest is gained when a company owns money. They reinvest it just like a bank. And with cryptocurrency, Facebook could conceivably take a percentage of each transaction.
We also know that companies like Russia and China have really pushed to have their information stored locally, so then they can have access to that. Zuckerberg said today that upholding this principle of encryption here may mean that our services will get blocked in some countries. What does that mean for them and their business model?
Well, it means that Facebook could be, depending on how you look at it, either walled off from parts of the world or they could wall off other parts of the world. So it's kind of like different sides of the same coin. But look, if countries like Russia or China create their own internet, it also means they're responsible for creating their own infrastructure. And one trend that we've seen through these large social media and technology firms is that they're almost extra-national organizations, meaning they're so large and they have such influence that they're able to communicate across boundaries. Mm-hmm. So depending on if you are Russia or China or Facebook, it may be that Facebook is the more powerful entity and is able to say, hey, look, we have our own monetization system, our own cryptocurrency, and our own communications platform. So it could be that countries end up being like isolated islands and have the opposite intended effect.
So interesting to hear you say. I want to ask you also, there was a survey done in 2017, and it found that Facebook, about 15 million people have just stopped using the platform versus Instagram, where they've actually grown. What do you make of that trend?
Well, let's not forget that Instagram is owned by Facebook. So as we see one side of the seesaw go down, the other side goes up, but the same company owns the seesaw. So wherever the users are, they're still on a Facebook platform.
Why do you think it is, though, they're moving to Instagram? And is it because of these privacy issues that Facebook has faced?
Well, privacy could be one thing. We could certainly see demographic and simply trends shifting with time, but it could be simplicity. Look, Instagram is one thing. It is photos. Right. Facebook is a number of different things, and often it's confusing. Instagram, it's easy for me to load. It's easy for me to understand why I'm there, and it's real easy for me to share things. With Facebook, you have more and more of these services kind of bundled under the Facebook banner, and it becomes complex.
Dan Patterson, thank you for joining us, Dan.
Well, with so much concern over keeping your data safe, a British company has created technology they claim can do just that.
Well, we hope it can. It can apparently make data so encrypted, they say the NSA may not be able to crack the code. Fox 9's Tom Lydon explains how it works.
Some call it the post-privacy age, when it seems like every phone call, every email is fair game. Hackers hitting companies like Sony and JP Morgan, movie stars like Jennifer Lawrence, even CENTCOM's Twitter account getting hacked. And maybe someday, you.
I meet board after board after board of large enterprise, and what keeps them awake at night is a hack.
Harvey Bolter runs a company called Decrypt, a phone app that allows you to make encrypted phone calls. Verizon now has a version they're offering to business customers.
It is military encryption, but now for everybody to use.
His team was recently in the Twin Cities meeting with banking and medical device companies, pitching a new mobile encryption system for emails, photos, and video. It works by sending you a one-time 5-digit key on your phone that's good for 30 seconds.
Every time we send a message, we use a new M4 key. That means that even if your device is compromised, I come hit you over the head, I steal your device, I take your private key, the data that was sent cannot be replayed.
So we sold to governments all around the world, but increasingly we're seeing banks all over the globe looking at this. Healthcare, huge market, defense contractors.
But computer forensic expert Mark Lannerman told us he worries about the fine print in their privacy statement, saying Decrypt will proactively assist law enforcement agencies to prevent criminal activity.
Either there is some kind of a backdoor or that they're maintaining records that you're not realizing they're keeping.
Is there a backdoor for the NSA in this technology?
Absolutely not, and that's one of the reasons why Decrypt is based in South Africa. So we are well beyond your borders.
Bolter says they also prevent downloads in world hot zones like Syria, Iraq, and Somalia. Eventually, he wants to see the technology used to encrypt social media passwords, medical devices in the human body, even the smart chip in the car you drive. The only question is, will businesses and consumers decide that privacy is worth the hassle of a 5-digit PIN number?
Frankly, you're walking down the highway naked as a data packet. And what we're doing is we're double wrapping you. We're putting you in an armored car and then putting that armored car in a tank.
It's quite a promise. Decrypt says their encryption technology has been used by special forces in Afghanistan and intelligence agencies here in the U.S. And while they don't promise the encryption is unbreakable, they say they would never promise that. They say some of the computer code is up to 5 million lines long and would take an agency like the NSA weeks to crack just a single phone call or email.
First of all, interesting point in your story. Google and Apple have promised our data would be encrypted, but you make it sound like the government's going to get there anyway. If they want that data, they will get their hands on it.
That's right, Emily. Yeah, there are a lot of misconceptions about what Apple and Google's new encryption features can and can't protect on your phone. Now, I should say at the outset, these new encryption features that Google and Apple are adding are an important step forward for user security. It's really important for users to be aware of security, to be aware of encryption, and these are important steps toward that. However, law enforcement still has many, many ways to get access to data that passes through your phone. And what Apple and Google's measures will do is they will encrypt data that's stored on your device. And now the issue is, if a piece of data ever leaves your device or is sent into your device, that is still obtainable via warrants. So the main losers in this are going to be local law enforcement who draw heavily on handing over phones to these companies and saying, open these things up and show me the pictures on them. For intelligence agencies like the NSA, it's not going to be that much of a difference because they collect records in bulk.
Jordan, specifically, it seems like Apple made some plans with their new phone to make it harder for the government to have them. Have we ever seen anything like this where a consumer-facing product has been purposely architected to keep the government out?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, we've seen, with earlier encryption technologies, there have been attempts to secure data, from the government, but we haven't seen anything like this. There's clearly a new paradigm at work here with the Snowden revelations, and Apple is taking, a really powerful step in saying we're going to encrypt all of the data on your devices. There's also another way to look at it, though. Responding to local law enforcement requests is a very time-consuming, bureaucratic process. And by making this move, Apple and Google are basically saying, don't bother us with a lot of these because there's nothing we can offer you. And in that sense, it can almost be viewed as a cost-saving measure.
U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, Jordan, has said it is fully possible to permit law enforcement to do its job while still adequately protecting personal privacy. FBI Director James Comey, meantime, saying, what concerns me about this is companies marketing something expressly to allow people to place themselves beyond the law. Are these technologies, is what these companies are doing, is it actually upping our security, or is it more of a gimmick?
That's a good question. It's a good question as well. I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, what this will really affect, as we've been reporting it, what we narrowed in on was what this will really affect are photos. And for local law enforcement, photos are central to their investigations. They'll see people, pictures of people doing bad things, and they can form the basis of their prosecutions, based on that. So in that sense, it does make it harder for local police to covertly look at phones. If you serve a warrant on somebody and demand their passcode, they're going to delete a bunch of data, and even if they give you the code, it's useless. So in that sense, it is making it harder for law enforcement to do their jobs. However, many of the other data points that law enforcement and intelligence agencies would be interested in are still very easily accessible in the same way that they were before, which is you go to AT&T or Verizon and you demand my call logs or my text message history or contact lists that I've updated to the cloud. Those things are all still very easily available, and it's a speed bump, as one privacy advocate put it, for most law enforcement requests.
I think it's interesting context too, Jordan, that of all the companies out there, Apple was the one that sort of fought off the PRISM demands of the NSA the longest.
Yeah, Apple and Yahoo came out that they were facing big fines if they resisted. And the companies were in a bad spot. They couldn't talk about these requests. They really couldn't fight them. For companies, especially for companies whose business it is to profile users like Google, like Facebook, that data has a lot more value to them and their reputations than it does even for the government in some cases. Apple's Tim Cook has made a point of saying, look, we sell products, we don't sell data. We don't care what you do with your data in most cases. And Apple has scored pretty high on a lot of security measures, so it's in line with other things that they've done. And Emily, to your earlier question about whether it's a gimmick, it's part marketing and it's also part security, and it's a little bit of both. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but that is what it is.
Joining a cry from law enforcement officials concerned about data encryption on Apple's newest operating system, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder said on Tuesday that officers should not be blocked from the information they need to investigate a crime. Apple's new iPhone 6, released this month, and Google's coming update of the Android smartphone have data encryption so sophisticated that only the user may unlock it. Even law enforcement officers with search warrants would not have access. Holder said in a speech before the Global Alliance Against Child Sexual Abuse Online, it is fully possible to permit law enforcement to do its job while still adequately protecting personal privacy.
The U.S. government is unable to hack iPhones that use an encryption standard they helped create. Oh, the irony. Hi Hacksaws, Julian here for D-News. Way back in 2001, the National Institute of Standards and Technology announced their new standard for encryption technology. The Advanced Encryption Standard, or AES, was the product of years of testing competing designs with open public scrutiny and feedback. The winner was made by Belgian cryptographers Vincent Reimann and Joan Damon, who called it the Readable cipher. And it's a doozy. The goal of cryptography is to make a message so scrambled the original message can't be divined. Readable does this by taking the data and breaking it into 128-bit chunks, a bit being the smallest unit of data in a computer, either a 1 or a 0. It then substitutes these bits with other bits. It's not as simple as a 0 goes in and a 1 comes out. Changing any one of the input bits should cause an avalanche effect, changing about half the output bits. Once the bits are swapped, they're moved around in a process called permutation. The substitutions and permutations are repeated up to 14 times at the highest AES level, which makes analyzing the jumbled data for statistical fingerprints almost impossible. But you may be seeing a problem here. The AES was developed in plain view of everyone, so if you know the math behind the steps, you could just reverse any jumbling, right? Well, that's where the key comes in. In between each round of swapping and swirling, a key is added to the data to confound the information further. If you have that key and run the steps in reverse, you can decrypt the data almost instantly. The key itself is a set of bits, and they can be up to 256 bits long. If you don't have the key, that's 256 ones and zeros that you'd have to guess correctly to brute force your way in. And that would take over 10 to the 77 tries. That's 1 with 77 zeros after it. Security architect Mohit Arora estimates that would take 3 times 10 to the 56 years with a supercomputer, which, for our purposes, let's just call that forever. The AES is so successful, the government has been using it to encrypt top-secret documents since 2003. The knowledge that JFK was actually assassinated by the Roswell alien is probably guarded by this cipher. So it's not a big surprise that some companies, like Apple, use the AES too. Apple has implemented it on iPhones to encrypt your photos, texts, emails, and health info. But obviously you can't remember a 256-bit password, so that is actually burned into the hardware. It's a unique ID for each phone, and Apple claims they don't keep a record of the keys and no software can read it. When you set a passcode on your phone, it combines that with the key and your data is protected. So obviously, guessing the 4-digit PIN is much easier than the whole key because there are only 10,000 possibilities. Apple counters that with an 80-millisecond hardware delay and, crucially, a software delay too. If you put in the wrong PIN too many times, your phone will make you wait longer and longer before you can try again. Get it wrong 10 times and the phone will wipe its knowledge of the key and the data is lost forever if that setting is turned on. But here's the catch. If Apple were to create and sign an update that disables those delays and automatic wipe, and let you enter PIN attempts quickly through a computer, breaking into a device would be a dawdle. And that's exactly what the FBI is asking Apple to do. Right now, the FBI is attempting to unlock an iPhone 5C that belonged to a suspect in the San Bernardino terrorist attack. The FBI asked Apple to write an update that could only be applied to this particular device, but Apple CEO Tim Cook is worried that won't be the case. What if the firmware update leaks? It's digital, so even though the FBI wants it to only be usable for this particular phone, it's possible it could be changed and used for more. Newer iPhones have a piece of hardware called the Secure Enclave that would need a separate firmware update, but anything older than a 5S would be vulnerable to this skeleton key. If the FBI does end up getting their way, you can still protect yourself. Longer alphanumeric passcodes will take exponentially longer to crack because of the hardware delay. A 6-character passcode of letters and numbers could take over 5.5 years. Apple lets you use those instead of a 4-digit PIN for now. So just how powerful does producing a leading smartphone with tough security make Apple? Check out our sister show TestTube here for the answer.
But much of Apple's financial success doesn't come from its quantity of sales, but rather the amount spent on each device. In fact, iPhones only count for roughly 14% of the global smartphone market.
Tim Cook's open letter talked about a need for discussion. Well, you know how the encryption works? You know what's at stake? Go on, discuss. There's the comments right down there, or you can find us on Twitter or Facebook. Subscribe for more, and I will see you next time on D News.